You're tuning into the deep dive because you're after those fascinating nuggets of knowledge, those unusual stories that really stick with you.
Exactly.
You want to understand the core of a topic quickly and thoroughly, and frankly, you appreciate when it's served up in an engaging way. Well, get ready because we're about to plunge into a truly intriguing piece of local lore. The tale of Bill Beaty's castle in Basking Ridge, New Jersey.
Yeah, and the persistent whispers that his spirit, still roams its halls.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this deep dive particularly compelling for you is the nature of our source material. We're looking at an article that not only details the history of this rather grand unfinished home, but also compiles decades of first-hand accounts.
Right, from people who actually live there.
Yeah, people who lived there and reported some very strange occurrences. This isn't just some fleeting ghost story. It's a collection of experiences that have accumulated over time.
And that's precisely our mission today. We want to explore the story of this Norman-style castle, conceived and begun by the wealthy executive Bill Beaty back in the 1920s and 30s. We'll piece together the historical timeline of its construction and the Beaty family alongside the personal narratives of what might be paranormal activity.
Sort of separating fact from, reported experience.
Exactly. Think of it as your shortcut to getting a real handle on this genuinely captivating case. Okay, so where do we begin with this ambitious project?
The foundation of this story, quite literally, is Bill Beaty's vision. In 1923, he and his wife embarked on building this impressive castle.
A Norman-style castle.
Yes, reminiscent of 17th century Norman architecture, set on a substantial 150-acre plot. By 1930, even with the construction still ongoing, the Beaty family, including their 4 children, moved in.
Wow. Into an unfinished castle.
You can picture it a grand, perhaps slightly chaotic family life unfolding within these castle walls as they were still being completed.
It sounds like a bold move, moving into an unfinished castle. Sadly, that dream, however grand, was short-lived for Bill.
Yeah, just a year later in 1931, he tragically died of the flu.
At only 45.
Yeah, at the young age of 45. He never saw his castle fully realized. It was finished about 5 years after his passing.
Which is key, isn't it?
It certainly seems that way. But it seems his connection to this place, his vision, may have somehow endured. His widow, Sarah Beaty, made this significant decision to remain unmarried and continued to raise their 4 children in the castle until 1941.
So, over a decade.
That's over a decade spent in a place so deeply tied to her late husband. Following that chapter, the property transitioned and served as a boys' school for several decades.
Imagine the stories those years might have added to the atmosphere of the place.
Right. Decades as a school.
Fast forward to 1972, and a new chapter begins with Don and Carol Burlingame purchasing the estate. They undertook renovations, and this is where we start hearing direct accounts of potential paranormal activity.
And Carol was the first to sense something out of the ordinary.
Really? How so?
What's interesting is that Carol's initial feelings weren't just dismissed as, her imagination. According to the article, a friend of hers, described as an amateur parapsychologist, visited the castle.
An amateur parapsychologist. Okay.
Yeah. This friend reportedly sensed a presence and advised Carol not to try and remove it, suggesting it felt friendly and that it was best to simply coexist.
Huh. So acceptance from the start, almost.
It immediately sets a unique tone, an acceptance rather than fear of the unknown. It makes you wonder, what might amateur parapsychology involve? It often relies on personal intuition and perhaps some basic sensitivity to unusual energies, differing from more formal scientific investigations.
And those initial subtle feelings soon gave way to more concrete experiences for the Burlingames. They reported hearing distinct noises, the sound of hammering in the hallways.
Footsteps on the stairs. Yeah, classic stuff.
Right, classic hallmarks, as you said, of a haunted house narrative. These recurring sounds, with no apparent source, led them to start considering the possibility that they were indeed sharing their home with the spirit of Bill Beaty.
And then there are the more specific, harder-to-explain incidents, like the story Carol recounted about the casement windows.
Oh, right, the windows. Tell me about that again.
She and Dawn were heading out, and despite Dawn suggesting she close the inward opening windows because rain seemed imminent, Carol didn't think it would rain and left them open.
Famous last words.
Of course, it did rain, but when they returned, all those windows were not only closed but latched, and the inside remained completely dry.
And they open inward, you said.
Exactly. The fact that these windows opened inward is key, as it really makes a natural explanation, like the wind blowing them shut, incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, that wouldn't work. It suggests some kind of deliberate action.
Definitely.
And then we move into what seems like the more whimsical side of this potential haunting, the manipulation of the TV signal.
That's a particularly curious detail, isn't it? Carol described how, just as a movie would reach a crucial or exciting point, the TV would begin cycling through channels 2, 3, 4, 5 repeatedly.
Like someone changing the channel.
Almost like that, yeah. It's almost as if this presence had a sense of humor or perhaps was just looking for a bit of attention.
Or maybe didn't like the movie.
Huh, maybe. It certainly reinforced for Carol that something unusual was happening in their home, and it raises the question, if it is a presence, what might be the motivation behind such playful interference?
These experiences spurred the Burlingames to delve deeper into the castle's history, and that's how they connected with Eugene Melville.
Right, who had worked at the estate previously. And Eugene had a very significant first-hand account to share, dating back to 1934.
Which was only 3 years after Bill Beaty's death.
Exactly. This is a really pivotal part of the story. Eugene recounts helping Sarah Beaty search for a lost bracelet.
Okay.
During their search, while they were on the balcony, he distinctly saw a male figure briefly materialize.
Wow. Just appear.
Briefly, yes. But what's so striking is Sarah's immediate reaction. She reportedly exclaimed that it was Bill.
She knew it was him.
Instantly. This wasn't just Eugene's interpretation. The person who knew Bill best identified the apparition as her deceased husband.
And Eugene's reaction, it really underscores the impact of this event, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He described it as frightening, saying it frightened the daylights out of me and that he never wanted to step onto that balcony again.
Understandable.
He emphasized that in all his time working at the castle, this was the only instance he ever witnessed such a thing. That singular, powerful experience from someone with a direct connection to the Beaty family adds significant weight to the claims.
Yeah, that kind of visceral fear from someone connected to the house really highlights the impact.
It truly does. And Carol herself experienced more inexplicable events. She recounted an instance in the kitchen when she was completely alone.
The bread incident.
Yes, the bread. A loaf of bread, sitting squarely on the counter with no possibility of a natural fall, suddenly flew off with considerable force.
Flew, not just fell.
Flew, traveling a noticeable distance across the room. For Carol, this was another undeniable sign Bill was making his presence known in a more physical way.
How did she interpret that?
Her interpretation, that it was Bill saying, "Hi, I'm here," reflects her growing acceptance of the situation. It makes you wonder about the nature of such physical manifestations. What could cause something like that?
Faced with these ongoing occurrences, Dawn and Carol decided to seek a professional opinion and invited Dr. Michaeline Marr.
A noted parapsychologist, yes, along with her assistant.
You'd naturally assume that scientific equipment might pick up some kind of unusual energy or presence, wouldn't you?
You would think so, but interestingly, Dr. Marr's physical instruments did not detect anything outside the norm.
Huh, nothing at all.
Nope. However, her professional assessment of the situation is quite telling. She emphasized that the sheer volume of the reports itself contributed to the credibility of the case.
So the number of different stories mattered.
Exactly. She also brought up the intriguing idea that humans can act as sensors, suggesting that our own sensitivities might be able to perceive things that our current technology cannot.
That's interesting, like we're the instruments sometimes.
Potentially. It raises an important question about the limits of our scientific instruments when it comes to phenomena like this.
And Dr. Marr also highlighted a particularly compelling account from another witness, right?
Yes.
No.
From a credible witness, in fact, a professional person of some stature, who claimed to have witnessed a person simply dissipate.
It's dissipate, like vanish.
Just dissipate right in front of them in the driveway of the castle. Dr. Marr's conclusion that this evidence couldn't be dismissed as mere coincidence is a significant statement from someone in her field.
Wow. So even without instrument readings, the personal accounts were strong.
It really highlights the inherent challenges in investigating claims like these. While concrete, measurable evidence might be elusive, the consistency and corroboration of personal experiences can, for some, build a persuasive case.
Which leads us to how people actually dealt with it.
Right, the different interpretations of why Bill's presence might still be felt at the castle.
Having lived with these strange occurrences, Carol developed a philosophy of acceptance.
Which sounds like the advice she got early on.
Exactly. She found that by acknowledging the possibility of Bill's presence, she could coexist with it, even finding a way to see the humor in some of the events.
Like attributing odd happenings to, "Oh, it must be the ghost," or "that's just Bill."
Yeah, it's a remarkably pragmatic approach to living in a potentially haunted house, almost a way to normalize the unexplainable.
Eugene Melville, on the other hand, held a steadfast belief that Bill would never truly leave the castle. He had a different take.
What was his reasoning?
He attributed this to Bill's deep affection for the place, suggesting that this profound emotional connection, this love of the thing, might have somehow tethered his spirit to it, giving it a lasting presence beyond his physical life.
A more sentimental view. Unfinished business, maybe.
Or just a powerful bond. It's a more sentimental and perhaps spiritual interpretation of the haunting. It makes you think about the strength of emotional bonds and whether they can somehow transcend death.
Now, moving beyond the primary article, the comments section of this source offers some fascinating additional details.
Though it's important for listeners to remember that these are unverified personal accounts.
Definitely. But interesting nonetheless. One commenter, claiming to be Bill Beaty's granddaughter, shared a story about her grandmother Nancy also being present in the castle with Bill.
Nancy. The article said Sarah.
Exactly. This commenter suggested an affair and children resulting from that relationship. This is quite interesting because, as you said, the article itself refers to Bill's wife as Sarah Beaty.
Which introduces a potential discrepancy or perhaps a more complex layer to the family history.
Right, and maybe adds another angle to why a presence might linger.
That's an interesting point, and it highlights a common challenge when dealing with anecdotal evidence. Inconsistencies can arise. It makes you wonder if this is a simple misremembering, if there's a more complex family history we're unaware of.
Or if it even casts doubt on some recollections.
That's a crucial observation. Discrepancies like the name of Bill Beaty's wife really underscore the difficulties in relying solely on anecdotal information. It could be a simple error, or it could point to something more complicated.
And another commenter recounts a truly unusual story about their father, who was a firefighter called to the castle.
Oh yeah, the fire story.
They recall that gasoline stored in the basement inexplicably exploded during a blizzard.
Gasoline in the basement.
And despite a chain reportedly blocking the driveway, their father's fire truck was somehow the first to arrive.
Oh, if the chain was up.
Exactly. It adds yet another layer of unexplained events associated with the property, almost hinting at some kind of unseen influence at play. The commenter even mentions a local belief that the ghost acts as a caretaker of the home.
These additional anecdotes from the comments, while we need to treat them with a degree of caution, certainly deepen the sense of mystery surrounding the castle.
For sure.
The detail about the fire and the seemingly impossible access for the fire truck during the blizzard is particularly striking and aligns with the overarching theme of unexplained occurrences associated with this place. It makes you wonder if there are other stories connected to the castle that haven't been widely reported.
So, as we conclude this deep dive, we've journeyed through the historical timeline of Bill Beaty and his ambitious, ultimately unfinished castle.
We've explored the first-hand accounts of strange phenomena experienced by the Burlingames and Eugene Melville.
And we've considered the perspective of a parapsychologist who, while not finding instrumental evidence, acknowledged the compelling nature of the personal reports.
Exactly. What makes this case so enduringly fascinating for you, I think, is the way it highlights how claims of the paranormal often rest on these personal narratives and anecdotal evidence rather than definitive scientific proof.
Yeah, it's all stories, really.
Yet the consistency and, at times, the seemingly impossible nature of these events can be quite thought-provoking.
And that leads us to our final question for you to ponder. Considering all these accounts, the unexplained noises, the moving objects, the apparitions, and even the strange circumstances surrounding the fire department's arrival, what kind of connection do you think might exist between a person and a place, even after death?
Could it be, as Eugene suggested, unfinished business, or a powerful emotional attachment, or perhaps something else entirely, something beyond our current understanding?
Reflect on the human element within these stories and what they might reveal to us about our concepts of memory, place, and the unexplained.
And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity further, you can actually delve into the original source material in a very direct way.
Yeah.
The Unsolved Mysteries segment about Bill Beaty's Haunted Mansion is available for you to watch.
Where can people find that?
It's on Amazon Prime, seasons 4 with Robert Stack and 3 with Dennis Farina, and you can also find it on YouTube featuring Dennis Farina.
So you can see the interviews and everything.
Exactly. We encourage you to explore these original broadcasts, witness the interviews and reenactments for yourself, and ultimately draw your own conclusions about the enduring mystery of Bill Beaty's haunted castle.